Hey guys, welcome back. Before we get started, if you guys like the work I do here, the reviews, the gameplay, anything airsoft, please consider hitting that subscribe button. It helps me out. Also hit the little bell icon next to it. It takes 2 seconds and then you can see all the content that I upload. I know, it's been a few months, right? It's been a bit. What's going on? Well, first of all, college. College eats time, eats funds, and that's just how it is, unfortunately. You know, right now I kind of have to take hiatuses more often than I'd like in the little YouTube world here, but that's just how it is right now. Hopefully in the near future, near's kind of relative at this point, but I'll be able to upload more content. And I do have a lot of things in the pipeline right now that are very much in the works, so keep an eye out for more content in the very near future. Today I've got something a little bit different. Arcturus has really started hitting the US lately, which is awesome. I really like them as a company. They do, I think, pretty good work for what you're getting as far as price and quality. So today I've got a very unique gun. This is the Centaur-A. It's definitely weird, right? There's no charging handle back here. It's actually up on the side. So this is a piston AR with like a MP5-esque charging handle up front. It's a little bit different. It's pretty lightweight. It's a little, what do you guys think of how it looks? Do you think it's ugly? Do you think it looks good? I used to not really be into the look myself. And then it just, over time, I saw it more and more and it kind of grew on me. And Brian formerly from Echo One, he got a number of review samples a couple years ago, so I contacted him and said, hey, do you still have this one around? And he was very kind in letting me purchase it from him. And I'm like, you know what? I'd really like to review this gun and see how it is. So I got it, and it's very comfortable. I really actually like it quite a bit. It's unique. You're not going to see a whole lot of these on the field or anything quite like it because they're just different, which right now in airsoft, pretty good thing actually. Before we talk too much about the gun, I want to talk about everything it comes with because it's quite a bit. They give you a lot of customizability for zero extra charge really out of the box. And I do like that about Arcturus because it really flows through with all their airsoft guns. You get 2 magazines with this particular gun, and most guns I think from Arcturus you do get 2 mags, which is rather nice. You get a high capacity magazine, which is actually a flash mag. I believe these hold about 400 rounds or so, which is awesome. I like to use high caps just personally. I do like mid caps as well, but it just depends on the gameplay. It comes with 1 mid cap as well, and it does have a little follower that does feed most, if not all, the BBs in the magazine. It has your obligatory cleaning rod. Oddly, a different type of mag release. This is the traditional Marui style where it's got the screw in one side, and it's pretty straightforward. It also comes on the gun the standard real AR where it actually screws into the mag release arm itself. So oddly, it comes with both of these, whichever way you want to go. And then we've just got lots and lots of extras, so I'll just kind of go over these. You get a couple of Allen keys to work on the gun, which is always nice. If a gun comes with the tools you really need to do the major stuff on it, that's really nice. It comes with a black flash hider, and I'll talk about this more later because I already took off the orange one that's included for shipping in the US. Now, there's quite a bit of like modularity, I would say, for the gun. It comes with a kind of a Magpul-esque stock, and of course, I'll touch on that in a second. You can take the rubber back plate off, and there's just a regular old like plastic cap here. I guess it's in case you lose it or you don't like the rubber back end to it. I'm not really sure, but it does include this. And then the Magpul-esque pistol grip as well does have a removable back strap with a beaver tail. I've got the standard one on it that doesn't have the beaver tail. And then you've got 2 inserts for the front, which you do have to take the pistol grip off for a version without a little finger shelf and a version with. Let's start with the back of the gun and move our way forward as always. The stock is basically your battery compartment, the buffer tube specifically. It does have a pretty Magpul-esque stock. I will say it's very similar to the MOE model. It does have your quick detach sling points in the back, which I really like. I've got a Magpul sling that I use. It's got a clip on one end and a quick detach end on the other, and I can easily hook it onto the sling attachment points on the front of the buffer tube here. So that works really well for me, and if you guys have one of those or something similar, one that just clips right onto the little buffer tube plate here, it works out really well. So battery goes in here. It's got quite a bit of space for a stick type LiPo. I'd say like a 7.1 would be more than enough. If you want to run an 11.1, do it at your own risk, but I do recommend a little bit of extra tuning and maybe a MOSFET as well. Taking the stock off is pretty simple. Just pry the pin down with a flathead screwdriver. There's a little metal cap on the end of the buffer tube. You do have to unscrew, and from there you can put your battery in. I like to leave the screw plate off on the back of the buffer tube, so I've got a little extra room for the wiring. Moving up the gun, you do get a pretty standard M4 lower with a one-piece, for the most part, upper with a long rail. So if you got some pretty crazy optic you want to throw in here, or you just like the extra room, you do have those options. The selector is actually screwed into place from the outside, so it's kind of similar to versions you might see with an ambi selector, but this version does not have that. So I've kind of got a little bit of a story. I'll talk about that in the internal portion of this review. Additionally, you do get the Arcturus logo here and a very specific, unique serial number. This one is 111, and so it's a pretty early model. The upper is pretty unique, of course. No charging handle. Instead, we've got the side folding little charging handle on the front here, very similar to, say, an MP5 or any other kind of roller blade blowback like that. You pull it, and it is going to open up the hop-up adjustment little window on the right side. It is a fake bolt, and it does lock back. And if you wish, you can press the left side paddle and release the bolt. It's got a pretty hefty spring behind it, so it does have a good clank. The front of the gun does have three kind of sections here, left, right, and bottom, for M-LOK inserts. It is compatible with them. You might have to watch the screw length a little bit so it doesn't hit the outer barrel there, but it can take your standard Magpul setup. It does include, very similar to M-Bus flip-up sights, a lot of Magpul-esque stuff on this gun, which I really do like. The back one is a little stiff. It's pretty hard to actually flip up. You really got to put some effort into it with both sides, not just one. It does have two apertures, your small and your large. It's adjustable for windage as well. The front is adjustable for elevation, and I found it actually flips up much more easily than the rear sight, so maybe it could use a little plastic filing in there. The flash hider is a metal one. I don't believe you're going to get these in the US, unfortunately. It just comes with the orange plastic flash hider. Also, the US version does have a shorter outer barrel. I'm not sure if you can get the longer version in the US yet, if at all, but unfortunately you do get the shorter one. It's also going to come with a different stock in the US too, so just keep an eye out for that. Now let's go ahead and put this down on the workbench, open it up, and see what the internals are like. All right, we've got the vital components out of the airsoft gun. That's the hop-up and barrel, the motor, and the gearbox. Let's go ahead and dive in. Some things I want to note about the body before we actually get to the vitals are the design of this thing. It's actually really neat, and I'll touch on some things I don't like here as well. It is a real style buffer tube, so it actually does screw into the back. It doesn't slide onto kind of the extension here that's onto the back of the body. The bolt catch here, or functional bolt catch, or the fake bolt, actually is part of the body as well. It's not a little latch that sits on the side of the gearbox like some other brands. I do like this design more, but it doesn't exactly have a way to keep it in there. So what ends up happening is every time you take this apart, if you turn this over, the two springs and the little latch come out, which is a little annoying, but it works. So I think the one thing that really annoyed me with the assembly of this gun, and it's more of a design thing than anything. It took me like a half hour to get the gearbox out of the lower receiver, and this is why. I'm going to tell you the story here. So this little cap, it was sitting right here, covering the screw. And I had no idea there was a screw there that allowed me to take the selector switch off from the outside of the gun. So I thought it was a standard Marui design selector. And I'm like, okay, fine. I look up in the grip, because the gearbox isn't coming out very easily, or at all for that matter, and I see this little peg on the inside, and I think to myself, did someone install that backwards, this little silver plate? So I proceed on that assumption that maybe it's the snafu or something. And so I end up having to pry the side of the body out just a bit and inch the gearbox out. This took like a half hour. I ended up actually doing a little bit of marring on the side of the gearbox, so I'll show you that in a second. But lo and behold, there's a screw here that would have saved me about a half hour strife, and I just had no idea, because this plate was glued on. And if it had actually been easier to see and maybe a little more obvious, it could have saved me a lot of trouble. This is the side of the gearbox where it kind of it sits right there in that little crevice hole, and I ended up having to kind of scrunch the gearbox out of the body. You can see where I really kind of marred up the bushing cage there. So unfortunately that damage is done, but the gearbox is still pretty strong. And I did have to kind of mark up the back of the gearbox a little bit with a flathead trying to get it out. The motor on this guy is their kind of standard motor. Nothing super special about it. It does have a D-type pinion. And you know, it does not have neodymium magnets, but I've actually started to like these motors a bit more. When I first got my Centaur-B, oh gosh, that was close to 2 years ago now. I wasn't a big fan of the stock motor, but they actually perform relatively well. If you run a 7.4, you can even run an 11.1 on it. I've been running an 11.1 on my Centaur-B, and it's been pretty solid. The responsiveness on the motor, I run a 120 spring in the motor, and it still is pretty responsive. There's not a whole lot of change on it. So they're not the worst motors in the world. Definitely a little more torque would be nice, but as a stock motor, they're actually not half bad. The hop-up and barrel on this gun are actually fairly nice, and to be totally fair, the internals on all the Arcturus guns are very, very similar and also pretty decent. The hop-up is a metal rotary style. It's really similar to, say, the SHS or the Pro-Win design. It's a little different, of course, but it's really close. It does have their nice 601 steel barrel, and I'll elaborate on the diameter of this a little bit. The specs from Arcturus actually say 601 plus or minus 0.01, so it could be anywhere from 6 even to 6.02. And most of the websites you'll look at, especially here in the US, will say 6.02. So they're kind of just giving you their largest bore possible. It does have a pretty hefty spring here, so the hop-up does stay nice and firm against the gearbox, which is definitely a plus. The adjustment here on the hop-up is pretty stiff, and it's not going to rotate or anything when you're actually shooting. And that was one of the things of the Marui, the Marui design, where it could actually rotate potentially, whereas this one, being a rotary design, it does help, and it's also very stiff as well. The barrel length on this guy, I took a measuring or a yardstick to it, and it came up really close to about 425 millimeters, so it's a little bit longer than your standard M4 length. Additionally, I did a check on the bucking. A couple of times the bucking, I have had 6 Arcturus guns so far, and I think 2 of them needed the bucking replaced. They were just kind of I don't know what was going on. It was a small tear. It wasn't really a big deal, but it was noticeable. The bucking on this guy is actually good and intact, and didn't have any problems there. Now, this is the gearbox. It is a micro switch gearbox, so you can hear the nice click there when you pull the trigger. Quick change spring as well, and we'll pop the spring and spring guide out in just a second here. But you can see from the outside, it's 2 sets of bushings and 1 set of bearings, and they're all 8 millimeter. One thing I really, really love, though, is the radiusing is pre-done to both the front and the back of these cylinder windows, so definite props there to Arcturus. That is excellent work. Spring in the gun kind of feels like a 110-ish. It'll get you, I think roughly it'll probably get you in that under 400, kind of high 390s range, somewhere in there. The spring guide, sorry, is pretty basic. Plastic shaft, metal fins here, and just a washer here. All the gearbox screws are out. Let's open this up. And take some gears out here. I'm going to retain the shimming so I can at least check the shimming on it and let you know how that is. And take all our parts out here. The first thing I notice is there's not a whole lot of grease. There's a little bit on a few places. And we got a decent amount on the piston and rails there and the piston head, so that's definitely a plus. Now, the other Arcturus guns I've checked so far, they tend to have fairly good shimming. The first Arcturus gun I got, the Centaur-B, needed a little bit of revision, and I think one of the M4s did, if I recall correctly. I could be wrong there. But generally, their shimming is really quite good out of the box. So it was totally the same with this gearbox for the most part. The only thing I would revise a little bit, if I don't start hitting things with the wiring here, is the shimming on the bevel gear a little bit. It is a little loose there, and you know, just in general, you can leave that one a little bit looser to line up with the motor and give it some play there. But I like to get it as refined as possible across the board, so that'd probably be the only thing I'd change as far as the shimming goes. The other 2 gears are just fine. Let's check out the compression on this gun. So, actually, it's really good. It's really, really good. It's really good. So I can't complain there. Compression's fantastic. The piston, metal tooth rack, second to last tooth removed, some cuts in the sides. Piston head is polycarb ported and does have bearings down there, so that's a definite plus. Cylinder's a Type 0, so no ports, full volume for the 425 millimeter inner barrel. Cylinder head is pretty plain, single O-ring, 1 damper. Seals reasonably well with the cylinder there, so definitely fine. The nozzle, a little bit of wobble. It's not an O-ring nozzle, it's just a regular old plastic nozzle, but it sits fine on the cylinder head. An air seal nozzle would help a bit, but probably not a whole lot. Tappet plate, it's pretty standard. It's not the most flexible, it's not the most rigid, so really can't complain there. So what I think of the Centaur-A, I actually really like it for the most part. There are some things I think could be improved on. For instance, the shimming could be a smidge better. In Arcturus, they usually do a pretty good shim job. I just noticed that the bevel went a little too high sometimes on this, and it could be shimmed a little bit lower and a little bit more solidly. But just small things. You know, you can correct the AOE, you can do this or that. The bucking, I did check it out, it looks fine, but I noticed in some of the chrono readings I got, off camera and on camera, both were occasionally inconsistent. I get a couple every 10 rounds or so that were in the 200 FPS range instead of the 300 range. So I might eventually put a new bucking into it. A couple of the Arcturus guns I have gotten in the past have had buckings that did need a little bit of work, or they weren't quite perfectly fit for the chamber, so they may or may not get the best FPS. What I've done to this gun already, because I expected it to shoot like 380, 400 like most of the other Arcturus guns, it was shooting kind of in that 350 mark, which is fine. It's kind of like that weird spot between indoor and outdoor play. Generally, if you were going to play outdoor, you probably wanted to shoot maybe a bit hotter, get a smidge more range out of it potentially. If you're going to play indoor, you wanted to shoot maybe 20 or 30 FPS softer. And this is kind of a long gun for indoor anyway. So I went ahead and dropped a slightly heavier spring in it. It's kind of like a 115-ish, 110 spring, maybe an older 120. It's just out of my spring bag. I got the speed up to about 390 with a 0.2. I also dropped in an older Echo 1 torque motor, so it gets about 14 rounds a second on a 7.4. A smidge faster and a higher FPS than the overall stock gun. I think Arcturus really does do pretty good work, and you're definitely getting a really good bang for your buck. In the US, I've seen these short barrel model run about $290, and generally you can find them either on sale or use a coupon code to get them a little bit cheaper. So for the money, I think you're getting a pretty solid gun. Out of the box, it sounded good, it shot well, the response from the trigger was actually fairly good, and I really can't complain a whole lot. So for like that sub $300 full metal, very unique M4-esque gun, I think it's a pretty decent buy. I'm gonna give this an 8 out of 10. I think there are small improvements that could be made, but for the most part, it's a solid gun out of the box, and I think you guys are gonna like it. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm Proud to do from Airsoft Team Kilo 23. Keep an eye out for some reviews in the very near future that I think you guys are really going to like. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.